She thought I would disappear quietly. She thought a man my age, with no fight left in him, would just take his grief and go. She was wrong about a lot of things. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I spent 38 years building something real, a lumber supply business in Asheville, North Carolina. Started with a used truck and a handshake from a man who believed I'd pay him back. I did. I always paid people back. That's the kind of man I am. That's the kind of man my son watched me become. And the kind of man I tried to teach him to be. My son's name was Daniel. He was 41 years old when he died. The doctors called it a brain aneurysm. Here one morning, gone by afternoon. I got the call while I was in the yard, stacking firewood. The kind of mindless work I do when the weather turns cold. My daughter-in-law called me. She said the words clearly. No trembling in her voice. No stumbling. I remember thinking, even in that first shock of hearing it, that she sounded almost rehearsed. I drove to the hospital. I sat in a plastic chair and held my son's hand until it was no longer warm. I am not ashamed to say I talked to him. I told him I was proud of him. I told him his mother, God rest her, would have been proud too. And then I drove home to my empty house, and I sat in the dark for a long time. The funeral was 4 days later. That was the first time I saw the man my daughter-in-law brought with her. He sat 2 rows behind the family. He wore a charcoal suit and a tie. I recognized not the pattern, but the way it was knotted. Daniel never learned to knot a tie that way. I taught him the half Windsor, and he stuck with it his whole life. This man used a full Windsor, confident, practiced, like a man who dressed carefully for important occasions. My daughter-in-law. I had called her my daughter-in-law for 11 years. So I will continue to call her that. Here glanced at him twice during the service. Not the way you glance at a stranger. The way you check on someone. I said nothing. My son was in a casket 6 feet in front of me. I said nothing. Her name is Renata. She is 43 years old. Originally from Charlotte. And she has a smile that I once thought was warm. I know now it was just practiced. The same as that man's tie knot. Everything about Renata was practiced. She and Daniel had been married 11 years. No children. Daniel had wanted them. He told me once, on a fishing trip up near Brevard, that Renata kept saying the timing wasn't right. He said it the way men say things they've accepted but never stopped hurting about. I handed him another beer, and we watched the water, and neither of us said anything more about it. I thought about that conversation a lot in the weeks after the funeral. The call came on a Thursday. 9 days after we buried my son. I had been going to Daniel's house, the house I helped him purchase, the house I co-signed the original mortgage on, back when he was 32, and just getting started, I had been going there every other day to help Renata with things. Groceries. The gutters needed clearing. The kind of physical tasks that grief makes impossible. She picked up on the 3rd ring. I need you to stop coming by. She said. I thought I'd misheard her. I'm sorry. I've spoken to an attorney. She said. The house is in Daniel's name, and mine jointly. His business interest transfers to me under the terms of the partnership agreement he signed. You don't have any claim to anything. And I need you to respect that. I sat down. I don't remember deciding to sit down. My legs just made the decision without me. Renata. I said, I'm not coming for anything. I'm coming to check on you. Daniel would have wanted Daniel's gone. She said, and honestly, the dynamic between you two was always complicated. I think some space would be good for both of us. Complicated. 38 years of Sunday dinners and fishing trips and Christmas mornings. And she called it complicated. His tools are still in the garage. I said, his grandfather's woodworking tools. Those were supposed to come to me. Daniel and I talked about it. I don't have any record of that conversation. She said, "If you'd like to make a formal claim, you're welcome to contact my attorney." She gave me a name. She gave me a number. And then she hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand for a very long time. What I did next, I want to be careful to explain, because it has been misunderstood by people who heard pieces of the story later. I did not act out of greed. I want to be clear about that. My business had done well. I owned my home outright. I was not a man who needed Daniel's money. What I needed to understand was why. I have an old friend named Clifton who spent 22 years as an investigator for an insurance firm before he retired to grow tomatoes and irritate his wife. We play chess on Tuesday mornings. 2 weeks after Renata hung up on me, I told him everything over a board. He was already winning. He listened without interrupting, which is a skill most people lose by middle age. When I finished, he moved his bishop and said, "How long before the aneurysm did Daniel update his life insurance beneficiary? I didn't know." "Find out," Clifton said. What I found out took 3 weeks and 2 conversations with people at Daniel's firm who were uncomfortable talking to me, but uncomfortable enough with what they knew to talk anyway. Daniel had updated his life insurance beneficiary 14 months before he died. He had changed it from Renata to me. His business partner, a man named Roy, who had known Daniel since college, told me this with the look of a man who had been carrying something heavy and was relieved to set it down. "He came to me last year," Roy said. "Said he'd found some things on Renata's phone. Said he was going to a lawyer. Said he needed time to get everything in order before he made a move." Roy looked at his hands. "He died before he made the move." "What kind of things on her phone?" I asked. Roy told me. I will not repeat all of it here. What matters is this. The man in the charcoal suit at my son's funeral had been in Renata's life for at least 2 years. His name was Marcus. He was a commercial real estate broker from Greensboro, and Renata had sent him a message, which Roy had seen on Daniel's phone, before Daniel deleted everything and said he needed time to think. Renata had sent Marcus a message that said, "Once the business transfers, we'll be set." The message was dated 4 months before my son died. I want to tell you that I went home and felt certain. I want to tell you that the path forward was clear, and I walked it with confidence. That would be a lie. What I actually did was sit in my truck in Roy's parking lot for 40 minutes, staring at a dumpster, trying to decide if the man I had always tried to be was still capable of doing what needed to be done. The tool that finally mattered was not rage. It was patience. I hired an attorney named Patricia Webb, who had been practicing estate and probate law in Western North Carolina for 30 years and had the kind of tired eyes that come from seeing exactly how awful people can be to each other over money. She reviewed everything I brought her, the insurance documents, Roy's account, the timeline, and then she leaned back in her chair and said, "Your son was smarter than she gave him credit for." She explained it to me slowly, the way good attorneys do when they want you to really hear it. Daniel had not simply changed his insurance beneficiary. In the 18 months before he died, he had done something careful and methodical that spoke to a man who was frightened of his own wife, but was not going to leave the people he loved unprotected. He had established a trust. He had moved certain assets, including his share of the business, including the account that held the proceeds from a property he'd sold 3 years prior, into that trust. The trust had a named trustee. The named trustee was not Renata. The named trustee was Patricia Webb. Daniel had come to her 14 months ago. He had not told me. He had not told Roy. He had sat across from this woman with tired eyes, and he had quietly, carefully, built a wall around what he loved. And then he had died before he could tell anyone it existed. Patricia had been waiting for the right time. She had been waiting, she told me, for me to walk through her door. "He left a letter," she said, "with instructions for me. He said if anything happened to him unexpectedly, I was to wait until a family member came asking questions before I acted. He said, and I'm quoting, "My father will come. He always shows up." I had to look at the window for a moment. I am not a man who cries easily in front of strangers. I am not a man who cries easily at all. But there is something about being known by your child, truly known, the way you hope to be known, that undoes you in ways grief alone cannot. I looked at the window and I thought, I see you. And so, I see what you did. The legal process was not fast. I want to be honest about that, because stories like this often make it sound like justice arrives like a train. On schedule, clean and certain. It does not. There were filings and counterfilings. Renata hired an aggressive attorney from Charlotte who sent letters with language designed to make me feel like a foolish old man pursuing a fantasy. Patricia Webb answered every one of them with the patience of someone who had seen this particular play before and knew how it ended. During this period, I had one encounter with Renata that I have thought about many times since. I was at the hardware store on Merriman Avenue, the one I've gone to for 25 years, picking up weather stripping for my back door. I turned an aisle, and she was there, looking at paint samples. She looked up. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She looked well. That was the thing that struck me. She was wearing a coat I hadn't seen before. Her hair was different. She looked like a woman who had already moved on, who had filed the chapter of her marriage and was busy writing the next one. "You should let this go," she said, not unkindly. That was the strange thing. She said it almost gently, like advice. "You're only going to hurt yourself. I'm sure it seems that way to you." I said, "Daniel would have wanted peace." She said, "Not this." I thought of Roy's parking lot. I thought of the message on the phone. I thought of my son sitting across from Patricia Webb, quietly building a wall. "You might be surprised," I said, "what Daniel wanted." I picked up my weather stripping and I left. The hearing was on a Tuesday morning in February. Asheville in February is gray and cold and not particularly interested in ceremony. I wore the same suit I wore to Daniel's funeral because it was the only one I owned and because it felt right to wear it one more time for my son. Renata arrived with her attorney and with Marcus, the man in the charcoal suit. He waited in the hallway. I noticed that detail. He was not allowed in the room. I have always believed that people who wait in hallways during important moments know, on some level, that they have no right to be there. The trust documentation was presented. The insurance beneficiary change was presented. Roy gave a statement. A financial forensics expert Patricia had retained outlined the timeline of asset movement and what it indicated about my son's state of mind in the final year of his life. Renata's attorney made arguments. They were good arguments, professionally constructed, and they might have worked against a less thorough preparation. But Patricia Webb had 30 years of tired eyes, and 30 years of knowing exactly where to look for the thing people try to hide. At one point, Renata's attorney suggested that Daniel had been unduly influenced in making his estate decisions, that I, as his father, had pressured him. Patricia placed 3 documents on the table. The first was dated 14 months before Daniel died. It was the initial consultation record from her office. I was not mentioned in it. I had not known it existed. The second was an email Daniel had sent to Patricia from his personal account, not his work account, 3 months before he died. It laid out his concerns clearly and calmly, in the language of a man who had thought carefully about what he was doing. It mentioned no pressure from anyone. It mentioned only his own fear and his own love for the people he was trying to protect. The third was a handwritten note. 2 paragraphs. In Daniel's handwriting. I recognized it the moment Patricia slid it across, to be entered into the record. He had his mother's handwriting, slightly tilted to the right. The letters a little too close together, like he was always in a hurry to finish his thoughts. I did not read it in that room. I couldn't. I read it later. Sitting in my truck in the parking garage. In the gray February cold. He wrote about me. He wrote about the fishing trips and the truck and the mornings I showed up without being asked. He wrote about the kind of man he had tried to be because of the kind of man he watched me be. He wrote, near the end, I know he'll take care of what matters. He always has. I sat in that truck for a long time. The finding was clear. The trust was valid. The asset transfers were legitimate. The insurance beneficiary change was legitimate. Renata received what the law required her share of the jointly held property. The house. Certain accounts that had remained in both names. She received what was hers. Not what she had planned on. The business Daniel's share, which Roy and I restructured in the months that followed, came back. The proceeds from the property sale came back. The life insurance came to me, as Daniel had intended. Marcus, I was told later by someone who moved in those circles, relocated to Atlanta not long after. I do not think about Marcus very much. What I do think about, more than I expected to, is a conversation I had with Roy about 3 months after the hearing. We were at the same diner, where Daniel used to take client lunches, a booth by the window, where you could see the mountains on clear days. Roy told me that in those last months, Daniel had seemed both frightened and strangely calm, like a man who had accepted something he couldn't change, but had decided to face it standing up. He talked about you a lot, Roy said, more than usual, like he was storing things up. I understood that. When you know something might be ending, you store things up. You make sure the people you love have what they need. You do the quiet work that no one will see until it's needed. That is what Daniel did. He was 41 years old and he was afraid, and he did the work anyway. If you are a parent, you know there is no greater pride than that. Not the pride of watching them succeed. The pride of watching them face something hard and not flinch. I still go to the hardware store on Marymount Avenue. I still stack firewood when the weather turns cold. The business is doing well. Roy and I brought in a third partner. A younger man who reminds me sometimes of Daniel, in the way he listens more than he talks. My son's grandfather's woodworking tools are in my garage now. They came back to me as part of the estate settlement. I haven't used them yet. I'm not ready for that. But I go out sometimes in the evening, and I run my hand along the old handles, the wood worn smooth from decades of use. And I think about the line of men. Those tools passed through my father's father. My father. Me. Daniel and I think about how a thing can outlast the person who held it and still carry something of them in it. There is one more thing I want to tell you, because I think it matters. Before the hearing, before the attorneys and the documents, before any of it, I wrote Renata a letter. I did not send it. I wrote it, and I kept it, because I needed to put the words somewhere outside my own chest. I wrote that I did not hate her. I want to be clear about that. Even here, I do not hate her. What she did was a betrayal of my son, and it was done with calculation and without remorse. And I believe she will carry that with her in ways she may not expect. But hate requires a kind of ongoing investment in another person's place in your life. And I was not willing to give her that. What I wrote, at the end of the letter I never sent, was this: my son deserved better. He knew it. He made sure I'd know it too. That's enough. That is enough. I am 64 years old. I have a business, a house, a Tuesday morning chess game. I lose more often than I win. I have a garage full of old tools and a booth by a window where on clear days you can see the mountains. I have a letter in Daniel's handwriting that I have read enough times now that I could recite it from memory, though I choose not to. Some things are better kept close. My son showed up for the people he loved. He showed up quietly, carefully, in ways no one saw until they needed to. I am my father's son. And Daniel Vasmin, that is the whole story. That is everything.